You know, believe it or not, there was 80s music that wasn't flamboyantly ridiculous, but what would be the fun in that? Spin it. Welcome to One Hit Wonderland, where we cover British New Wave bands and only British New Wave bands, or at the very least we easily could. And today we are getting as in-your-face 80s as we can get, as you can tell by the fact that our singer appears to be dressed as a geisha pirate. Yes, even in an era where everyone pretty much dressed ridiculous, we're going to look at a band that made everyone else look about as gaudy and colorful as the Dave Matthews Band. Yes, today we are looking at Dead or Alive. And in 1985 they spun us right round, baby, right round. Like a thing that goes around in circles, like helicopter blades or the inside of a microwave. Actually, I want to point out that the full name of the song is You Spin Me Round, parentheses, Like a Record. Not Right Round. Anyone who confuses it with the Flow Rider song will get punched. Of the many, many new wave pop acts, You Spin Me Round stands out as one of the more memorable, especially the band themselves. They were one of the most campy and ostentatious acts ever to hit the top 40, dead or alive, but You Spin Me Round Like a Record was their only record ever spun, at least in this country. Well, it should come as no surprise that someone who dresses like that is not going to quietly shrink away from the spotlight. No, they had a long career after You Spin Me Round, and yeah, it pretty much is all like you expect it to be, so let's get started. Watch out, here they come!
And here are Dead and Alive.
Dead or Alive is the main project of an absolutely fabulous man with the surprisingly unfabulous name of Pete Burns. And much like our last 80s band, Flock of Seagulls, they came from the fertile Liverpool new wave scene, although they quickly moved past it with all its moody, guitar-driven post-punk, not nearly over the top enough. Burns' first band was a punk band called Nightmares in Wax, and he was also briefly a bandmate of Julian Cope, who was a big name if you're a total music geek like me, but you're probably not anyway. Eventually in 1980, he renamed the band Dead or Alive, and they released a few EPs that gained attention. He also started developing his own distinct, unique style, and if you'll notice, he does definitely look a bit like another 80s pop star. Yeah, the comparison between Pete Burns and Boy George was pretty obvious, and was made by the press a lot. So naturally, the two men dealt with it with all the down-to-earth, drama-free sensibility that you would expect. It got catty immediately. Pete Burns accused Boy George every which way of ripping off his style, and in response, Boy George was quoted as saying, "It's not who did it first, it's who did it best." Oh snap! Oh snap! Pete Burns apparently dealt with it by dressing more and more ludicrously, which we will get to, trust me. They released their full-length album in 1984, Sophisticated Boom Boom. After building up an audience, they got their first top 20 hit with a cover of Casey and the Sunshine Band's That's the Way I Like It, a song which keeps coming up in my episodes. And spoilers, we'll do so again in the future. Naturally, their version is a more dark, gothier take on dance music, but Dead or Alive would stop resembling an actual rock band fairly soon after this. Apparently they got tired of being The Cure or Susie Sue's fun sibling, and they instead went full-on high-energy dance pop, because that was when they met an up-and-coming production team known as Stock, Aitken, and Waterman. Ha! It's relevant, so it doesn't count! Ha! Yes, you can blame these three guys for the Rickroll. And if you think about it, the Rickroll wouldn't exist if it didn't start with that sudden blast of fake drums and blaring synth, and it's a good indicator of their sound as a whole. All synthesizers, bass way up, keyboard stuff blaring everywhere. If you ever hear a big 80s hit that's way too loud and sounds like there's way too much going on in it, that's probably them. The last half of the 80s basically belonged to them. They made the underground dance club sound the defining mainstream music of the 80s. But in 1985, they were still looking for that first big hit. And with Dead or Alive, they found it. You Spin Me Round starts with a slow build-up. No, it doesn't. This was stock Aitken Waterman's first hit. I'd say it's also their best. This is probably where the sound of new wave became the sound of mainstream pop, which is also why it's their best, because instead of relying on doofy simps like Rick Astley, they have Pete Burns working for them, and Pete Burns was absolutely made for this kind of music. You can't say that Pete Burns doesn't have the personality to pull this off, and oh, hi guys that don't matter. That's probably not fair to the other guys, one of whom is the actual writer of the song, don't know who. But let's face it, this song is all Pete Burns. Matter of fact, I can tell you this listening to it, despite all the times the press compared the two, I'd say Culture Club and Dead or Alive have actually very little in common. Boy George always presented himself as kind of a wilting flower, whereas Pete Burns was always full force, like a gay Tom Jones. He was definitely more on the RuPaul Glamazon end of the drag scale. Though I'm not sure drag is the right word, but yeah, nuance was not what Pete Burns was aiming for. He seems to have only one setting on his volume control. Not that he had much competition from George, who was basically swimming in pure heroin by 1985. Also, Pete Burns was just better looking than Boy George, let's admit it. Actually, even more than Pete Burns' utter force of personality, what sells it is those glittering keyboard runs in the treble. You Spin Me Round is all fast motion. It sounds like you're being spun round like a record. Matter of fact, even though there's a lot to admire about it, that's why I can't say it's one of my favorites. It's just full blast at all times. It's not a very pretty song. It can get kind of blaring and obnoxious if you listen to it for too long. You know, too much spinning makes you dizzy, you know? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, not my favorite record in the world to spin. Ugh. But it did put Dead or Alive's forceful androgyny on the map. So how could a personality this large not stick around? Dead or Alive released 3 more singles from that album. Much like any of the new wave acts I cover, they did okay in the UK and nothing in the US. Now musically, Dead or Alive's follow-ups were... I'm sorry, I can't even pretend like I care about the music. So let's take a look at those ridiculous fashions. Nice. I'm pretty sure I've seen Cher wear that same outfit, but I know what you're thinking. Isn't there a video where he's twirling a parasol while riding a clam? Ah yes, there we go. I suppose I really should say something about the music, but I'm not sure what there is to say about it. If you've heard one Dead or Alive song, I find that really you've heard them all. Pete Burns was a great pop star, a great image, but Dead or Alive really just didn't have the songs to back it up. Yeah, they kept going for a long time, but I've listened to their greatest hits album, Evolution, and I can tell you that even though they persisted for decades and were releasing new albums as recently as 10 years ago, Evolution is a pretty wrong description of them. They never evolved. Even though Pete Burns rotated out band members left and right, after their big hit, Dead or Alive did pretty much the same thing throughout their entire career. They made big, loud, screaming synthesizer club tracks that were always about being on the prowl for sex. This is what they sounded like in 1986. This is what they sounded like in 1996. As someone who thinks they can be a little difficult to listen through for even one song, let me tell you, I really don't recommend going through their albums. They were sort of successful on the dance charts, they notched in the top 40 once or twice in the UK, but for the most part they faded from the public eye, and no one in either country thought about them again. Until 2003. You've heard of Celebrity Big Brother, right? Well, Pete Burns was on the UK version, and oh boy,
Not in my hands, and I want that coat back within the next 2 hours. I'm furious. I don't give a fuck about.
Holy Christ, what is that? If you can't tell, Pete Burns has had some work done. And, holy God, he looks like a cross between a Cyclo from Battlefield Earth and a squashed tomato. Christ, why couldn't he just age like Boy George and just get dumpy and old? But apparently he was so delightfully bitchy on that show that it launched him back in the spotlight and even got You Spin Me Round to rechart, which let him undergo even more plastic surgery. This included apparently one surgery that went so badly that he blew his life savings trying to fix it. What does he look like now? Yeesh. Lady Gaga in 30 years? For what it's worth, Pete Burns has found steady work hosting British reality TV up to the present day, which I guess is not really that surprising. God, what makes a person think that much plastic surgery is a good idea? That's just grotesque. Sorry, what was the question? No, they didn't. They seem to have all the ingredients for a longer career in the glamtastic 80s, but songs just weren't there. Just weren't. No, this is a band that really only put it together for one song, and everything else they released seemed like a lesser variation on the same thing. They never released anything I thought was bad or a waste of time, but they're definitely a minor entry in their genre. But I guess the name of the song was You Spin Me Round Like a Record, not multiple records. Dead or Alive, proof that you can't sustain a music career on attitude alone. Good night.